Excellent. Thank you for doing this. It's going to be a great talk on body ownership and virtual reality. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to you and shut off my video and mic and just let you talk for a while, and then we'll do questions later. Thanks, everybody. Make sure your mics are off if you are. Sorry, one last thing. Make sure your mics are off, and all that kind of stuff, so that, we don't pick up background stuff. So thanks, everybody. All right, all you, Stephanie.
All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the VSGI speaker series. This is the last one of the semester, I believe. All the previous recordings are available on the speaker series website. We've had different talks from Q&A for parents, how to build your own board game, how to run your own game studio, and things like that. So if you are interested in any of the other talks that were given this past semester, you can go ahead to the speaker website and take a look at those. They've all been recorded. Thanks, Michael.
Stephanie, just make sure you're speaking as straight to the mic as possible, because it seems like it's cutting out. Like, even get closer like an old person does if you have to, just because it seemed like it was getting a little bit less as you moved around or whatever. So just something to think about. Cool.
Try to project.
Yes, exactly. Yes, old people, Scott. All right.
So today,
back to you.
We are going to talk about virtual body ownership and its uses. Basically, it's going to be the ability to put yourself in anybody's shoes. It's a pretty neat phenomenon that virtual reality provides for us. And let's go ahead. First of all, let me introduce myself. I'm Stephanie Kane. I got my bachelor's degree at North Mason University in 2008 in history, of all things. I'm currently the research coordinator for the Virginia Serious Game Institute. Also a current graduate student in the game design master's degree program. This is actually what I'll be presenting today is my thesis. This is what I've been researching for the past semester. I'm also the co-author of Serious Games and Personalized Learning. I wrote one of the chapters of Scott's wonderful book about that. So what are we going to do today? Today we're going to talk about what is virtual body ownership, how can it be used, the therapeutic tool I designed called Gravity for gender non-conforming and transgender people. And then at the end, we'll have a question and answer session. So what is virtual body ownership? Basically, if we break everything down to its most basic parts, you are your brain. And the world around you is how our brain interprets all of the signals that we get, whatever you smell, whatever you taste, whatever you touch. The Matrix really kind of did a really good thing with that. Rene Descartes says that I think, therefore I am, which means that everything you know is that you exist. That's it. That's all you know, is that you are a conscious being. And so if reality is only what we perceive, then you can change what you perceive. And to begin with that and how we can change how we perceive the world around us, we can talk about the rubber hand illusion. This was discovered by Drs. Matthew Botvinnik and Jonathan Cohen in 1998. Basically what they did was they had subjects hide one hand either underneath a table or behind a partition. And then stimulus was provided to both the rubber hand and in the real hand simultaneously for about 20 seconds. And then once the connection was made, stimulus was provided only to the false hand, and subjects claimed that they could feel it. Actually, about 80% of subjects reported that they could feel as if this hand was their own. This shows that bodily self-identification can be swayed by any kind of external stimuli. Dr. Mel Slater continued this illusion later, but instead of physical hands, he wanted to try to use a virtual one. And he found that ownership of virtual limbs and bodies, He found that the ownership of virtual limbs and bodies basically have the same kind of processes that make us own our own biological bodies. In Germany, there was another doctor, Dr. Michael Schaefer, who tested to see if subjects could believe that they actually had an extra third arm virtually. While most of the participants couldn't be convinced that the arm was in their full control, they did all have the sensations that they could feel the third arm and that they believed that it was actually theirs.
Looks like he was able to get the most recent version. Yeah.
Justin, can you please turn off your mic?
Sorry. So then Dr. Slater also then attempted to have subjects see if they could take ownership of an entire virtual body. They put the subjects into virtual reality, into the body of a girl, had them explore the room for a few minutes, and then they were approached by a being in the virtual space, a non-playable character, who would then stroke the person's shoulder and then slap them across the face in the virtual reality. They tested it 2 ways, both with an aerial camera and then a point of view camera. And the subjects reported to only feel the sensations through the point of view camera. And so that means that there are some limitations to when we can feel ownership. So what does this mean? If we can convince people that virtual body parts or virtual bodies are their own, we can use this in different therapeutic ways. And actually they have been. It's been used in pain management to distract from wound cleansing and burn wounds. It's been used in physical therapy for specifically stroke victims or people who have lost limbs and suffer from phantom limb pain. It's been used in PTSD therapy, phobia therapy, autism spectrum disorder, social and communication therapy as well. And so if we can believe that we ourselves are in different places or that we could inhabit different bodies, maybe we can use this to change our identities. So the benefit of having a malleable sense of self means that we can examine things from other perspectives. One of the greatest things about being able to do this is virtual reality will allow you to look into other people's lives. It has been used to put people in the shoes of Guantanamo Bay prisoners, solitary confinement. It's been put into, people have been put into virtual bodies of people who are different races or ages to address those issues, homelessness, and also refugees. There was also another experiment called Girl Mirror Look. Well, this wasn't really actually an experiment. It was a performance art piece created by artist Philippe Bertrand. And basically what he did was he connected 2 Oculus Rift headsets. So the performer and the subject could see through each other's eyes. And what would happen is they would put on the headsets, they would see each other, and then they would connect via a handshake. And in that physical stimulus would then connect your brain to seeing to being where you're seeing. And so there was a Kotaku reporter, Ben Kuchera, who actually tried this out, and he actually reported feeling what's called gender dysphoria while playing this, which is a discomfort or a distress at viewing yourself as the wrong gender. And so it was a really interesting look at could we put people in different perspectives of gender. And so users connect with scenarios by witnessing it, by being present. And presence is the knowledge, like the logical knowledge that you're in virtual reality, but the external stimuli and the perceptions cause you to overlook that. I don't know if anybody is familiar with being in virtual reality. I know for me, you know, you logically know that you're in a virtual space, that nothing can actually hurt you, but your brain will still have that kind of lizard basic part that's like, oh no, I can't step off that cliff, I'll fall. When in reality, if you step off that cliff, you're just taking a step on your floor. And so it's really a really interesting phenomenon that you can have. And presence is determined by 3 dimensions. You have your personal presence, which is having the ability to move and perceive the virtual world. And then you have the environment, which is having the virtual world behave like the real world would. And therefore, if you have, for example, in your virtual environment, music playing in the corner, as a person goes towards where the speaker is, the music would get louder. As they go further away, the music would get quieter, just like it would in real life. And then there's also social presence, which is being acknowledged by the characters in the virtual environment. If you're not being acknowledged, either with eye eye contact or speaking or something like that, then you feel like you're kind of an invisible ghost and you don't feel like you're really there interacting with the virtual world. So combine all of this together, and I designed a therapeutic tool called Gravity, and it's a gender role affirming virtual identity therapeutic experience. And it's a virtual reality tool for transgender and gender non-conforming people to explore their gender and common situations. And so what is it? So Gravity, I already explained, is a therapeutic tool. By combining virtual body ownership with the sense of presence that VR provides, you can assist a population whose true identity has really never been fully represented in daily experience in a safe, comforting place. So why for transgender people? Well, trans people have existed since people have existed. And unfortunately, the history of them has often led them to being ostracized and pushed aside and victimized. Constantly being told that they're mentally ill, that it's a sickness, that something is wrong. Currently, transgender and gender nonconforming people still face issues such as social stigma. We hear all the time about different politicians trying to pass various laws preventing trans people from using certain bathrooms, getting the care that they need, being able to participate in gendered activities. But they also face employment, housing, and medical discrimination. 1 in 4 trans people actually report losing their jobs simply because they are trans. And only 18 states prohibit workplace discrimination based on gender identity. Trans people get denied for gender affirming care coverage through their insurance. So even if you haven't lost your job and you have health insurance, you still can be denied the coverage that you need for important gender affirming care, such as hormones and gender affirmation surgery. So transgender and gender nonconforming people are really an underserved population that really requires care, continuity of care, the freedom to explore, and understanding from everyone around them. So how is this going to work? So it should be played with the assistance of a therapist or a counselor. So somebody who can help determine what the player would be ready for, and also to help the player with the emotions and fears that come from exploring their gender or from these kind of sometimes very difficult social situations. The players are going to be able to play through a variety of settings that can be uncomfortable for transgender people, including a job interview, a doctor's office, and public restroom use. Non-playable characters in these scenarios will have their own personalities and interact with the player differently, depending upon the player's chosen avatar and their selected mode, which I'll get into more later. The player will be able to view their avatar's reflection in mirrors and surfaces so they can examine the body that they have chosen and really fully explore themselves as this person. For example, one of the scenarios is a bedroom and a bathroom, and the player will be able to examine their nude body. And yes, I do plan on having the avatar be fully customizable, including genitals. They'd be able to shave, apply makeup. There's also going to be a computer in the room so they can check social media, check their emails, and that would actually change as well depending upon the mode being chosen, what you can view on that computer. But the most important thing is the avatar creation. The player can create an avatar with masculine, feminine traits, a mixture, specifically transgender traits, which are genitals affected by hormone therapy, because that does happen, chest surgery scars if mastectomies happen. And the players will also be able to choose pronouns and any honorifics that they want, sir, ma'am, captain, whatever you would prefer. So there will be 2 available settings. The first is the fully affirmative mode, where every non-playable character will use the chosen proper pronouns and honorifics of the player character. And the player will face no negative comments or harassment. And this is just to allow you to explore various gender identities, because in the transgender community, you start off as questioning, having maybe some gender non-conforming behavior, and it's generally kind of a process to figure out and land on a true gender identity. It's not just a switch that gets flipped. And then there's a realistic mode, which is going to be helpful a little bit more in gender affirming therapy, where some non-playable characters will be transphobic or negative. No one will be outright violent, which is an unfortunate reality for transgender and gender non-conforming people, but I feel like it kind of would miss the point, which is to be able to handle stressors. And being able to work with a counselor, this will help the player work through possible negative scenarios, how to deal with them. Role-playing is already a very popular thing to have in gender affirming therapy. So of course, with the help of a therapist, you can experience a negative aspect and then take the headset off and then be able to work through it and figure out how you can deal with something like that in the future. So the positives of this kind of therapy is it's a temporary exploration of gender identity. If you're not quite sure if you're trans yet, you're still questioning, you're still trying to figure out who you are, there's no need to go through any kind of medical or permanent kind of social coming out process until you're quite sure. It's a safe place to explore all of this. There's also going to be no pressure to perform gender in any specific way. If you feel like you're a woman, but you love masculine things, or you want to have a mixture of gender, there's no pressure to pass, which society sometimes puts on trans people. And it's a safe space to practice handling difficult and stressful situations that can come up in real life if you're trans or gender nonconforming. Now, there's also the possible issues. Virtual reality is expensive. It's still not readily available in everybody's offices or homes and things like that. Finding and training appropriate and willing therapists could be difficult. Some therapists might balk at the idea of having to have technology. It's also difficult to find therapists trained in gender affirming therapy. It's still fairly new. And so finding all of those things combined together could be difficult. And then the biggest problem is it could possibly cause further dysphoria. So you are basically virtually cross-dressing in a way. And it is possible that once you're done with the session, it could cause more stress when it's over. Hopefully, I would like to be able to apply for research grants and hire a team to build a prototype and test the efficacy and make sure that it isn't too dysphoric to take off the headset when you're done, and make sure that it really makes people feel like they're in the body of the avatar that they chose. I would love to see this be a regular part of gender affirmation therapy, maybe help alleviate some of the barriers to transitioning. I do know that in some places you're required to go through a certain amount of therapy and live a certain amount of time as the other gender before you can get the surgery and the hormones and all of those things. And so maybe this could kind of help alleviate some of that. And while it is not my initial reason for designing this, cis people could absolutely play this game and maybe feel some empathy towards what happens to transgender and gender nonconforming people and maybe how they feel a little bit. And that's it. Any questions?
Looks like there's two already in the chat. If you want me to ask them to you, Stephanie, or you want me to read them out to you? What's that? Okay. So I'll read them out. And I'll skip the why is the character so angry, because that was specific to a slide and Scott was just having fun. So Teresa said, this is a great idea and great way to use technology to help people. Have you spoken to psychologists / therapists about the therapeutic benefits or risks?
So I have on my committee, I actually have one social worker from George Mason University who works with transgender people, and I also have a gender affirming therapist from a LGBT life center who also is on my committee and helping with making sure that this is a therapeutic tool.
Awesome. I'm gonna come back to. I'm gonna do these in different orders because Teresa had a quick follow up on that. Has it been tested on gender non-conforming people? And I'm assuming because it's a prototype, it hasn't.
No, not yet.
Right, it's a design at this phase, but that would be the idea. Okay, and then Scott asked about, are you going to seek FDA approval for the platform as a therapeutic device?
I haven't really thought about that step, but if I am to get it, if I'm to get it actually being used as a therapeutic tool, then yeah, of course.
Okay. And then also Scott asked, and this you brought up the committee members and some of the folks who has been working with you on your committee as developing this thesis, and ultimately we'll be grading you on it.
Dr. Scott Martin has been working with me. He is the chair. And then Sang Nam has been helping me with the virtual reality aspects. And then I have Dr. Vicky Kirsch, who is from the George Mason University Department of Social Work. And then I also have Dr. Corey Gerwe, who is part of the LGBT Center and is the gender affirming therapist that I've been working with.
Excellent. Okay. Next question, and folks feel free to keep asking them in chat, and I will keep reading them as they come in. Sai asked, what do you think of exploring different genders, races, ethnicities, professions, etc. through role-playing games such as D&D? With the comment, that's the question. The comment is that there are no visual stimuli to the extent of those in virtual reality, but is what is that they thought of when read about this talk as people have role-played as personalities, that they are biologically not for a long time. So again, using other tools within the same kind of field.
So there is a precedent for people to explore various identities through games. There's tons of books on it about identity and relating to characters and how people create avatars as these idealized fictional versions of themselves. That there's all this research about that. And so I don't believe that, I mean, there is already things that have you exploring different races and things like that. And role playing is a very powerful kind of way, but I feel like being able to have the external stimuli will be able to really kind of enforce the therapeutic model. And so while I think that, you know, role playing games are excellent, and please continue to do them and explore who you are through them. This is just a tool for those who maybe need a little extra therapy and a little bit of extra experience in that kind of.
Okay. We have another one in here. I'm gonna do a follow-up on that just so that we can keep it going though. You mentioned some books and or other, elements that people have done in the past. And are there specific books or even, games or tools out there that, allow people a good flexibility if they were to do this, since yours is still in the design phase, right? And obviously there are tools out there that they can use to some differing degrees, just not obviously in the great way yours combines it. Are there things that they should read? Are there games that they could play with to do this in that give a good flexibility? Maybe some of that real quick, and then I'll get to the next two questions.
Sure. So if you're interested in different kind of identities and how to identify with certain characters, Gaming on the Edge by Adrian Shaw is an excellent book. If you're interested in looking at different kinds of queer representation and how we can discuss queer identities in games, games have always been queer. So that's another one, or also Queer Game Studies. I've read all three of those books. If you're interested more in the body ownership and VR process, I would recommend Pete Rubin's Virtual Presence. That's where I got some of my information in regards to that as well.
Okay. Let's see. Ying Yang asked, what is your hypothesis for the end goals? Like, what is your ultimate, I guess, goal? If you just wanted to boil down, and what is the hypothesis behind what this will allow? I think you covered a little bit of this, but if you just want to cover it a little more explicitly.
So in combining all of the various kinds of research that has been done in this space and then inferring the possibility of viewing yourself as somebody else. I'm hoping that users will report that they do actually feel like they own this body. Um, while they're in the VR, I hope that I hypothesize that they'll be able to feel like their gender dysphoria is alleviated while in virtual reality, and that this could be a really helpful therapeutic tool for gender affirming therapists to use to help role play. So maybe take some of the pressure off of those therapists, because I know it can be difficult when you are with a patient and you have to role play a very negative person. It's very difficult for that patient to be able to kind of not have negative feelings towards you after that. And so maybe by separating that role play to a virtual person, then all of those negative feelings that the patient would have would be towards this virtual NPC and not the therapist that's actually trying to help them through this.
Got it. Lily asks, would the experience be limited to one user, or could it be expanded to a social virtual safe space for groups?
So my plan right now is for it to be one user. It's funny that you talk about social virtual safe spaces, because transgender people have been using social virtual safe spaces since virtual reality internet games have existed. VR chat, Second Life, The Sims, avatar creation in any kind of game. And so these spaces can be found and they do exist. And so while it's not my plan to have it be multiple user, that is also a very good benefit to have. I know that they exist for various groups already. This is just going to be for one user in a therapeutic setting.
Excellent. And of course, there's always, the ability to adjust and expand as you go forward if it does well. So
Exactly.
awesome. All right, we've still got some time left. We've still got an excellent talker here to ask questions of. So feel free to ask more in chat and or raise your hand. Excellent. Getting some good thank yous already. So, and I think you mentioned some of this, and I'll ask a question because I think this is one I had earlier while we're waiting to see if anybody else still has anything. And you mentioned it in multiple ways, and maybe it's a multi-prong approach, kind of like the idea of it being single player to start with, and maybe there being a more specific space for multiple users if it does well. But is your vision for this for it to be a tool that is used primarily within a therapy, directed therapy, like with somebody, a therapist, or whatever proper person would be, and then they would work with you, whether it's directly at the time or to be there to guide you, etc. And or would there be the self-guided, I just go on to the appropriate store and download it and play with it myself? Is it both, that type of stuff? What were your thoughts on that?
So my initial design is that it's in a therapeutic setting with a therapist, just because I guess the population that it's made for would require that. I feel like it would be important to have somebody kind of walk you through everything, kind of help you deal with your emotions, deal with the stresses, deal with things that come up in being trans. And I feel like you miss a really good integral part of that if you don't have it. So my initial plan wasn't to release this for just in public use. It could absolutely be tweaked a little bit and designed for creating empathy. And that was listed on one of my possible outcomes, is that this could be an empathetic game as well, just like all of the other ones that talk about, being a death row prisoner and being in Guantanamo Bay and all of that other stuff.
And I think Lori actually mentioned this, and there's a few more questions in here too. It's a good template for other experiences, etc. I just throw it out there because I know one of the things you mentioned, and people might have this thought too, right, is you mentioned how it's hard to explore these experiences in a way if you're not comfortable with them yourself or expressing them to others. And so a therapist may not be at the point to do a therapist. So having a tool, even a starter tool to introduce them to the idea of therapy might be something to consider. So that's a good thought process. So I think Scott had mentioned, when you were thinking about the types of, races, ethnicities, gender options, the different things, you mentioned genitals, et cetera, right? What kind of process went through your mind? Like, and I know that, there's some good engines out there to create characters, right? But at some point, there's potentially too much choice or too little choice. Like, have you thought about that balancing act, and what was that process like for you?
So I haven't really, what was important to me was being able to kind of explore the various options, basically what happens to your body when you are transgender. You are, excuse me one second.
Sounds like there's somebody in the room. That's fine.
About that. Okay. So it was important to me for being able to have the choice of all of these different things, because when you're talking about somebody who is transgendered, that can mean a lot of different things. It could mean somebody who takes hormones. It could be somebody who has had surgeries. It could be somebody that's had none of these things. It's a spectrum, and the identity is very fluid and flexible. And so I wanted to provide enough choices that everybody gets an understanding of what happens to your body during these procedures, during hormone therapy, those kinds of things. But also I wanted it to be a way for people to kind of create the person that they always felt that they were. And so it is important to balance between the various different things, especially if you're adding an entire body, possible genital, options.
Sure.
It can be overwhelming. And so I do want, I do want this to be the biggest part of it, because you're actually, I guess, creating an idealized version of yourself. And it's going to be able to help them work through, like, okay, do I want surgery? Do I want hormones? Do I want these things? And it can help filter out what they really want out of this whole experience and what they really want to look like.
Gotcha. That actually brings up a great question, but since we're talking about this anyways, and Nathaniel has asked about, like, as far as this avatar creation process, does it seem like this would be something that they would do, before they go into VR? Is it something they do while they're in VR? Have you given thoughts to that?
So the first, I guess, like the very first thing that they're going to do is create this avatar. And I feel like it should be outside of VR with their therapist sitting next to them, who can explain to them, like, this is what happens to a penis when it's been exposed to estrogen therapy. This is what happens to this. And here's all of the different things that we can do and how you can look and various things like that. Somebody who can walk you through this explanation. And so that's going to be the very first thing. And before they start the game at any point, they will be able to go back and edit their avatar. So maybe they find that they're not really a man, maybe they're non-binary. So then they can go back and change. And that was the whole point, was being able to explore and try on these different kinds of identities until they found the one that fits them.
Gotcha. Which actually brings me to my question. I'm sorry I keep throwing them in there, but this is a good point. And as moderator, I get to do that. Have you thought about, and maybe this is something that, requires additional elements to it, but you mentioned, again, imagining themselves, right? And, and we've all hopefully, experienced or are familiar with, the different types of avatar creation types of things out there. And they're not always intuitive, and they're not always easy, right? And we've probably also seen, those old things where they took a picture of your face and they try to put it in the game, right? But there's something to that. Like, have you thought about, like, the idea of, like, if somebody really wanted to see, like, what would my frame of body, right? Whether it's, whatever size, whatever dimensions, whatever, if I went through this, what is the most likely look of what I would look like at the end of this versus, trying to build it themselves. And I think your therapy, your therapist idea is good because they can help them down that path, but they would have to be good at that process too. So maybe it's something where you could bring in their body and use AI or machine learning. I think somebody who does that to create this changed body based on some variables that they want to do, and play around with them. But again, it would be based more on them as a starting point. And then they could, of course, deviate in any way that they wanted to from that, based on what their feelings are, or what they want to explore, to your point. Have you thought about that?
So actually, when I first designed this, it was my idea that it would be some kind of physical representation of the actual person. But I was not technologically capable of figuring out how that would work.
Right.
So you bring up machine learning and artificial intelligence and taking a photo and kind of, I guess it's the same technology as like the deep fakes that we have now, right? And so, it's probably possible, and I would love to see and explore that that possibility to kind of take some of the pressure of creating this more realistic avatar off of the patient. It was my initial idea. I just didn't know how to execute it.
Gotcha. It might be also good to look into what, and I know it's tangential kind of, but it's the same, some of the same stuff, but like plastic surgery, for example, has gotten much better at visualizing what people do through a lot of these things. So there might be some technologies and or created new technologies that could do some of this with you. We have in here, I think Scott had mentioned it and Lori kind of expanded on it, but like, what kind of languages this might be in, what are you looking at as far as like, is there initial platform, what kind of languages are you thinking of? And I think even Lori mentioned that's a great thing because you could even try on different races and or languages and or experiencing people that are speaking in different ways to you, not only in terms, but in languages. So what are your thoughts on that?
So my initial thoughts are it's going to be in English first. If there's going to be other languages, I would like to serve the next languages in the United States, so probably Spanish. And so and like Lori just said, I just saw it, languages would be so hard. It would be, because not only are you going to be writing a script for all of the various different options and the various different ways people would be interacting with you, but also every language has different slang and different terms for these populations. And so you would have to really get somebody that would know, the language in and out to be able to explain and use all of these various different terms. It's one thing to misuse the proper pronouns. It's another thing to maybe call somebody a transphobic slur that might not translate very well. And so it all depends. But I would love to see it in different languages, and I would love to see it in being used by different populations.
Gotcha. It looks like a lot of what we're seeing into the discussion now seems to be a little bit more suggestions and or comments. For example, the idea that obviously this can be a template, which we mentioned, the idea that it could be different kinds of experiences. And I think seeing what they do as they undergo therapy, which Lori pointed out was good, and Scott congratulated you. And then Ying mentioned, I think this is something that I think this is what you did in yours, is like making sure you don't get too broad going out of the gate, right? Like make sure it's focused on the one thing that you really want to hit. And I think that's where Ying was going with the hypothesis and the goal, right? It's like, it can always be expanded, which is great because it is a great template, but make different milestones, so to speak. And Lori was also even talking about like the international students, right? Like getting built in, and they do this, and this, and I'm sure people up there may or may not know this, but there's all these different kinds of simulations for just even like going to different countries, right? And how you fit in and how you assimilate, and the government goes through that. So yeah, definitely good.
There was a conference I went to pre-COVID where a linguist was actually talking about virtual reality, and they had a virtual reality prototype that they had built where you don't speak whatever language you choose. I believe the example that they showed in the video was Russian. And so you would be in virtual reality and everybody around you would be speaking Russian, and you would pick up items and then you would hear what it was in Russian. And so it was supposed to teach you this language by assimilating you into it and forcing you to only hear it and understand that. And so it was a really interesting way to be able to do that. So yeah, Rosetta Stone in VR. And so, this, languages, empathy, putting people in situations that they might not normally get to experience. That's the whole point of VR. And so I think that anybody who comes away from this talk thinking, well, maybe I can use the phenomenons that VR provides in this way. And I encourage you to do that. Please, please, please. I think VR can be a really great tool to use because it's one of the few things that really affords us the ability to don for real, like at least in our brains, for real identities, that we normally wouldn't get to try on. And so if you have an idea to use VR in this way, run with it. Run with it. I think it would be genius.
Excellent. So I put in chat, I don't want to make sure, I want to make sure we don't cut anybody off. We still have a few minutes left, obviously. It does look like we don't have any questions unless I missed anything. If I did, I'm sorry, feel free to re-ask or raise your hand. Or if you have anything else that you want to do, let us know. Otherwise, we'll we can clear it up as soon as we're sure everybody's done. But I want to thank Stephanie for coming on and sharing her wonderful thesis and what you've been doing, and obviously, thanks for everybody that is attending to coming to these talks. If you think others would benefit from it, like Stephanie said at the beginning, these are being recorded, so you're welcome to share these with folks, and then you can always reach out if there's additional questions or commentary after the fact, right? Or, if you have suggestions on people to work with, or want to work with Stephanie, I'm sure she'd welcome grant help, right? Things like that. And so we will have a new slate of talks for the speaker series, next fall. And so if there's things you want to see, obviously send information our way at the SGI. My information's on the website. I think Stephanie's is probably as well, but I'll put it in the chat as well. We're always looking for innovative game tech, fun stuff to discuss that not only, appeals to just game people, but just folks in general. So if you've got something, let us know. And I don't see any more questions. I've seen some great kudos, which is awesome. But I guess we'll call it then. Thank you, Stephanie. I think your mic's on. I just didn't hear you. It looked like you were saying hi or something.
Oh no, I just said thank you. Thank you.
Okay, cool. Any last thoughts then, Stephanie?
No, just thank you guys so much. This has been great. I'm really happy to see so many people interested in virtual reality and servicing the trans community. And thanks to everybody. Thanks to my committee and allowing me to present this. I'm really excited. So,
awesome. Cool. All right, everybody. Thanks a lot. We'll call it there then. Been a great talk. Really appreciate everybody showing up. We'll leave it on as you guys are funneling out, and then Michael has already stopped it, or can stop the recording, and we'll go from there. And we'll see you next fall.